So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Missy from the York County Soil and Water Conservation District, and she's going to be leading us through today's training on wildlife. And she has some great resources put together for you and almost finished with some additional ones that you'll be getting in the wrap-up email with the link to this recording video. So without further ado, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn things over to Missy. Thank you.
Okay, so let me start. So Rob, we just have the one team, Rob's team, right? So feel free to jump in if you have questions. I'm going to try to kind of go through what I normally do with the fall field days and kind of talk a little bit about the skull ID. That's always one of the funnest parts. And then I have actually put together a Jeopardy game that we can play that I think will help with further discussion and maybe some other questions you guys might have. So, and I wanted to also kind of introduce you guys to the materials that are in the wildlife or safari boxes that are available for you to borrow from some of the different organizations that host them. I know mine is open and available to borrow, and all you need to do is just contact me and we'll find a way to get it to you. And so that box contains skulls and skins. It contains some rubber track casts and rubber scat casts and lots of resources that will give you a lot of background information that you need to know for preparing for the wildlife test. But again, one of the funnest things to do is really, I think, personally, the skull ID portion. And so I just have a few slides here to kind of go over some of the structures that we'd be looking at on these skulls to determine what species they're from. And if you haven't participated in the Envirothon test before, there are questions that revolve specifically around the identification of these skulls. And unfortunately, in the online environment, it's not as easy because you don't get to actually handle them, which is why I definitely suggest, if you don't have a collection of skulls at your school, borrow one of these safari boxes so you can kind of play with the materials. So when we're looking at skulls, one of the first things, you see these terms that are on this slide, looking at different structures on the skull that we use to differentiate, one species from another or even subspecies. But the first thing you should look at is size. So length and width of that skull is probably the first comparison that I would have you look at. Without something to measure against, it's kind of hard to tell how big the skull might be. So it's important to make sure that you do have sort of a size reference and identification, because some species do look very similar. But again, when you're able to look at them live, and I think we're going to make sure for the exam, any skull images in there will have a ruler for in the image for you to help identify these skulls with. But size matters big time. So if you think of what critters live here in Maine, and you look at a little itty bitty skull, right away you're going to be able to eliminate quite a few species just on size. Generally, we're sharing adult skulls with you, so there are some variations if you are a biologist in the field, and you get into some of the animals that, maybe some juvenile skulls are going to look similar to another species adult size skull. But in general, for this test, we're looking at adult skulls. So there's a big hint for you there. So when you're looking at the size, you'll be able to eliminate, quite a few species. You're not going to look at sort of a small, maybe 3 or 4 inch long skull and identify that as a black bear because, you know, they're just size right there makes a big difference. The other kind of fun thing is to know your teeth. So if we are looking at, well, let's see. We're looking at, this happens to be a beaver skull. And, you know, the beavers are in the rodent family. We're looking immediately at those incisors. So those two front teeth, very long. And beavers, they're orange on the outside. That tells us right away they're part of the rodent family. So that narrows down the species ID immediately. And then with the beaver, you know, the size matters because the beaver skull is a little bit bigger and thicker than, say, a rabbit or a mouse skull would be. As we're continuing to look kind of at this image of a skull, again, you've got the incisors in front. Then just like in our mouths, we've got premolars, which in this case are generally missing from rodents because they've developed these big grinding molars to grind their food down into smaller pieces. So the absence of premolars are another indicator that this is in the rodent family. Let's see. On this skull, you know, we're looking at again, knowing the incisors are there, are those front teeth, and in many animals, we've got 6 incisors in front. Right behind those incisors, we have, in this case, our canines. So when you start to see those canines in these skulls, you're going to start to recognize that, okay, this is an animal that can catch prey. I don't know if you can see this. This happens to be a raccoon skull that I'm holding up. I don't know if you can see me in this because all I have is the slideshow in front of me. But you can see that we've got these big, long canines. So now I've got even more information about this skull because I know he can actually catch his own food, own prey. So that automatically puts this skull into that omnivore or carnivore family. And then from there, I can continue looking at the teeth and seeing what else is going on for premolars and molars and other structures. So behind the canines, you got premolars, and in some species, they're very well developed. And there's a very large, flat premolar that's called the Carnasial Tooth. And it's pretty obvious. It's the one toothy. I always say it's kind of like their knife. They can use that to sort of tear their food up into smaller bits to chew. And then behind that in the very back, we end up with molars. So I would definitely recommend studying the dentition of the different species because as we looked at, you know, previously this beaver skull, there's incisors and there's molars. And if we look back at this skull, we've got incisors, canines, premolars, a carnasial tooth, and the molars. So it gives us a lot of information about what species this might be from, but it also tells us a lot about their habits, you know, what they can eat, what they're looking for food, and where they might be found. So understanding that dentition is important. This image is of the upper jaw and the skull. A lot of times, you know, if you're in the woods and you're wandering around, you might only find the bottom jaw, and sometimes that's only half of a bottom jaw. And sometimes in some species, there's a difference in the dentition between the upper jaw and the lower jaw. So it's very important to study that. Within the wildlife box, there's this really great resource about animal skulls and how to identify them with some really good keys in there. So it's a good exercise if you can get.
Hold that just a little bit further up for the camera. There you go.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
A little blurry, but at least it's all in frame.
Yeah. This just being able to learn to key a skull is really important. And it's kind of, again, it's a fun activity to do with the students as well. So that's all included inside of these safari boxes. And we can always get you some, I don't know if there's an online link to that manual or not, but we can see if we can find that for you. Some of the other features on the skull that we look at, we look at where the eye set is on the skull. So if we're back here, if the eye is set, in front, that would indicate most of our predator species have their eye set towards the front of the skull. That way they have that depth perception that helps them when they're catching prey. Very much like us, we have our eyes kind of in the front, so we have a really great depth perception. A lot of the prey species have their eyes are set to the side, and that is so that they can see, a predator maybe sneaking up on them. They can see, around the side of them better, but they tend to have a little bit of a blind spot in the front. Some species, their eye set, it may be a little bit higher in the skull versus the side. And again, that is based on a lot of just, how they've evolved to, just how they've evolved to live in their habitat. Like, for instance, with the New England Cottontail, one of the key characteristics is that their eye set is a little bit more to the side than their Eastern Cottontail cousins. And therefore, they don't see things like predators from the sky coming down to get them as easily. Hence, they are a little shyer and stay in the shrubland. So there's some of those little subtle differences. But eye set is going to tell you a lot also about whether this animal might be a predator, might be a prey species, whatnot. And then there's some other cool features. We've got the Sagittal Crest, which is a ridge that runs along the top of the skull. In some animals, it's more defined than in others. Can be used as a way to differentiate between very similar species. You have the Zygomatic Arch, which is like basically kind of like your cheekbone. It rings your the eye socket there. It's where your tissues attach to hold the lower jaw in place and provides a lot of muscle attachment. So when you have very thick zygomatic arch, which you can see a little bit here in this beaver skull, it's a bit thicker. It just tells you that he's going to have a little bit more jaw strength, or bite force. And knowing that beavers use their teeth to chop down trees, it makes sense that their bones are a little bit thicker and stronger looking. So another one that I like to point out is the auditory bullae. That's where the animal's eardrum lives, and the bigger that auditory bullae structure is, the better hearing they have. And again, a lot of the predators have a much more pronounced structure there. And then this is a bobcat skull, but again, it's just kind of showing some similar features and how it's a little bit different when we're looking at the felids. They have just a bit of a shorter snout, so everything's a little bit more compressed in there. And then I thought this was a good slide to just look and compare with similar species. So we have the coyote, we have the red fox. Here in Maine, we also have the gray fox, which the skull is very similar to the red fox. We have the wolf skull and a domestic dog, and I could tell you one of my professor's most favorite things was to put in a weird domestic dog skull in the middle of our exams just to throw us all off with these. So we won't do that to you guys. But, you know, again, the first thing looking at these skulls, if you had them in front of you, the first thing to do would be to measure and see what the size difference is. And that's a big key to differentiating between these four. One of the other parts to the wildlife exam that is going to be just a little different this year is sort of the habitat questions. So, you know, we just talked about skull ID. We'll have some skins for you to look at, some track casts and scat. But another really important thing is to be able to assess habitat and understand what could be living here and why. And so getting familiar with, you know, these different types of habitats that are found around the area are really important. We're going to be able to show you an image of a habitat, and you're going to have to make that assessment based off that image and what you know. So, for instance, this is a silver maple floodplain. These are found along major rivers, particularly here in sort of the southern part of the state. The Saco River has a lot of this floodplain around it. So kind of being able to recognize some of the tree species and vegetation and looking at some of the structure and asking some of those questions, like, do you think this is a place you might find New England Cottontail? And what is the habitat that New England Cottontail like to live in? Is this, you know, is this shrubby enough for them? You know, and those are going to be some of the questions that you'll have to answer on the test and identify these habitats. So there's a lot of overlap, I think, with the wildlife tests and some of the forestry information as well as aquatics. So you never know when these types of questions might pop up. Again, this is more early successional shrubland and transitional habitat. So again, being able to identify, you know, structure makes a big difference for a lot of species. And I use the New England Cottontail as an example, but they're just one of many species that use sort of this really thick growth and in transitional areas. So you never know, again, what picture might pop up, but being familiar with these are really important. It could be an image of a field or an opening next to mature forest. So again, what do you think is going to live there? And then don't forget that we have a great coastal system of estuaries. We have rivers and streams and lakes. So there's always a possibility that one of those pictures could pop up. But then again, you know, understanding how these habitats support wildlife is super important. So that one of the other biggest resources I think out there is the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife webpage. And can you see that on your screen, Allie?
No, we still see your PowerPoint in the editing mode.
All right. Here we go. How's this?
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay. Okay, so Inland Fisheries just has a ton of information on their website. If you go just to their main page, this is where you end up being. And if you click on Fish and Wildlife, it'll take you into sort of this general page. And then from there, if you were to click on any of these links, but species information is the one I go to first, now you're going to get into a whole bunch of resources. So this is where you're going to find information on species that are listed as endangered and threatened. You'll find some more habitat information in here. You can learn a little bit more about some of the game species, some of the management strategies and plans. The State Wildlife Action Plan, I think, was put together in 2016. It's a 10-year plan. That's got a ton of great information. And then there's often, if we just click in and we were to pick black bear, there's a lot of specific species info here. And there are some links to, this is a game animal, so there's links right here to the laws, to trapping, harvest information, research and management reports, and then the assessment and management systems for those. So there's a lot to read, for sure, and a lot of this is just great background information, especially I think for the advisors to have and then translate to the students, or students can take sort of a chunk of the information and study it and then bring it back to the rest of the team. But there's a lot of info. And when we talk about wildlife, don't forget there are reptiles and amphibians are part of that. We talk about insects, we're talking about birds. So this subject area really kind of covers a very wide range of critters that are out there. So definitely be familiar with all of those. And again, endangered and threatened species, that we're looking to make sure that you guys know what those terms are, and giving really good examples of species that, or understand which species are endangered and threatened. And sometimes there's questions in there about why. So it's good to sort of understand where they're at and what risks and threats they're facing. And also it's good to understand how the listing process works for species. And then again, the Wildlife Action Plan is really well laid out, and there are annual reports that are produced that are written by the biologists that are doing the active research. So as I always say, if you've got a really good question, you could always reach out to your regional biologist or one of the research biologists that cover a specific species or specific project that you have. They're usually really interested in answering your questions and working with students on this stuff too. So they're a great resource.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So I believe in 2019, last year, they went from having a single, research, wild management and research report to like differentiated ones. So there's a mammal report and, amphibians and that kind of, it's all been divvied up. Yeah. In terms of preparing for the Envirothon, is there any advice on where to focus energy within those? Because when you go to that report page now, there's like a whole slew of reports to look at.
Yeah, let me see if I can. This is the report you're probably talking about.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I would focus a little bit. Well, it is a lot. There's a lot of really great information in all of these reports. And it can definitely be a little bit overwhelming. I would say the endangered threatened species report is an important one, because a lot of times we're talking, there may be questions on there about, list an endangered species or click off the ones that are listed as threatened. So it's definitely important to understand those lists. And then there's just some really good background info. You don't think you necessarily need to read it front to back, but that's a good one. The other one, probably getting familiar a little bit with the reptile and amphibian management. And again, you'll have to sort of glean the information that you'll need through that. And then game species is kind of an interesting one. Is there's a lot of times there's reports on harvest data, and in the Envirothon there's been questions related to pulling data out from those charts and sort of doing some interpretation. I think those are the three, and then probably the fourth would be the habitat conservation. I think a lot of the rest of these have a lot of good info. There's some overlap, but those are what I would focus on those.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think it just gives you a background. I think big part is again getting used to identifying skulls, getting familiar with the pelts and the tracks are going to be really important, and understanding where critters are living is another big piece. So is there any other questions? So kind of what I wanted to really do is just jump into this Jeopardy game.
Okay, I do have a question, Missy.
Yeah, sure.
How many regional biologists are there in the state system?
Oh, that's a good question. I will have to look that up.
I'm assuming they're spread all over the state.
They are. There are regional biologists, assistant regional biologists for both wildlife and fisheries. They kind of separate those positions out. And then they have their research groups that are species or game specific biologists that are doing like the moose program,
Right.
The bear program, shorebirds, that sort of thing. And yeah, that's a good question.
So
and
you
it's
need
on,
to go hunt.
if you go on this inland fisheries page, I'll see if I can find it. There is a listing of all of their offices and their staff.
Okay.
And I know I can speak for down here for the regional office in Gray. There's a regional biologist and 2 assistant wildlife biologists, as well as fisheries biologists. But sometimes they cover each other and do a lot of really interesting things. So go on their page and it will take you to their list.
Okay. Just thinking if a team or an advisor was looking maybe for somebody to ask some questions of that type of thing, having some sense of how many choices there were would be helpful.
Sure. So I happened to find it while we were talking. So this is on I actually went into this little search box and just typed in staff directory. But here's the warden headquarters and then the Fish and Wildlife regional offices. So there's a big listing there.
Yeah.
And then the Wildlife Research Office is out of Bangor, but there's quite a few biologists working out of that program. And then the fish hatchery folks are listed. So it's right there. Yeah, good question. And all their email addresses are right there. I think right now, most of the wildlife biologists a lot of them have been out doing like vernal pool surveys. So I would email because a lot of those guys are out in the field right now. All right. So I think the Jeopardy game, I'm gonna put it in, I think I've got 4 teams. We can just we can just take turns with questions, I guess. So is there another group of advisors and students besides Rob No.
Yeah. No, there are no groups. There's one other advisor on the call.
Right. So you get to be a team, Carol.
Yeah. Rob, what's your school again?
Spruce Mountain. We could really quick. I could take one of the kids in one room, and Ken could stay here with one of the kids in this room, and we could have two teams being logged in two different places.
Sure, if you'd like to do that.
All right, we'll go. I'll go do that real quick.
No problem. And then Dale, who's the other person?
Carol. Korea, is that the correct pronunciation? C is the last name.
We'll make Carol a teammate with you, Dale. How's that?
Oh God, poor Carol.
Well, we can add Allie too if she wants to go in. You guys can come up with a team name too if you want.
Hey, can I just be an observer? That would be just better for me today, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Missy, I'm still catching up on all of the resources that you were sharing to put in the email.
Okay, no problem. Maybe I'll just make it Spruce Mountain 1 and 2. How's that, Dale? I'll take you out of the hot seat.
Thank you.
So I put this Jeopardy game together, and we'll share this with you guys, so that you could do this with your teams as well and go through these questions. You could always, this is just through Jeopardy Labs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Can always kind of create your own version or add some questions to it. But I thought this would be a much more interesting way to talk about, the wildlife topic, rather than me just talking at you guys. I'm very used to doing this training as very hands-on and getting the students, asking the students a lot of questions and getting them involved in discussions. So this is my alternative for you. So as soon as Spruce Mountain is set up and ready, just let me know. Or if there's any other questions. As far as resources go, I am putting together some videos that go through the identification of each individual skull that's in our safari boxes, so that will help you guys a little bit. And they're short videos, and they're going to be separate per species, so they'll be easy, to pull up and watch. And again, the important thing is keeping them to just a few minutes of talking, so that it's the right amount of information. I get kind of excited about talking about wildlife stuff, so I have to check myself.
Missy, I think all the teams are here now.
Yep.
They're here?
The other Spruce Mountain team's up.
Okay.
Oh, Missy, before you jump in, we had a
Yes.
question about what the safari boxes are. So if you could just talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, so on the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife website, there is a link to the safari boxes that are hosted throughout the state. So York County Soil and Water has one of the newer boxes, which is a smaller collection that contains, I think we have 4 skulls, like 4 pelts. We have the replica tracks and replica scat that go with those species. And then it's filled with a lot of general information. There are the booklet that I showed on Skull ID. There are also some of these kind of really great species profiles with just some really great general information on them. There are little field guides for tracks, and in this case, our game fish. There are posters. There are lesson plans. There's all kinds of cool stuff that's in there, and those boxes are they're supported through Safari Club International, which is a trappers association, and they are free to borrow for any school, any teacher, and you just have to contact the nearest location that has that hosts the Safari box, which again is on an Inland Fisheries and Wildlife website. And you can keep them. Generally, most teachers keep them for at least a week or two, and then return them. We just do an inventory when they come back to make sure everything's there. But they're free for you guys to borrow, and it's just a box full of those resources to help with teaching about Maine wildlife and getting ready for the Envirothon.
It usually is one of those big Tupperware tubs. We usually refer to it as the box of dead animals.
Thanks, Dale. Mine is a mini box. Some of the old.
I forget Safari.
The first round, these were done through, again, a grant from the Safari Club. And the first round of Safari boxes were really, they were the bigger Rubbermaid containers, and they had a lot more skulls and skins. And then about, I think, 7 years ago, they got a second grant, and those boxes are a little bit smaller. They contain a few less species, but they're either way, they're still a great resource. And I would just make sure to check in, because I'm not sure, with COVID and restrictions, everything's changing very, very rapidly this week. I'm not sure what protocols are for some of those organizations that are hosting, but like I said, I can say for mine, it's free to borrow, and it doesn't, even though I'm located in York County, if somebody outside of York County wants to borrow it, they're more than welcome to. We just have to work out the pickup and drop off.
I do know that I've heard that there are some limitations through IF&W, and so it's worth contacting them, but they may not be readily available. I also know that up in Aroostook County, I think it's Dottie Dudley, I believe, is the person up there. I think she has a safari box or a nature box that she has put together that they will loan out. I'm not real clear, like Missy. I'm not quite sure about what the policy is with IF&W at this point. But that's a place to start check.
Can you guys see, are you guys still looking at the Jeopardy game, or do you see the Safari in a Box page?
Safari in a Box page.
Okay, perfect. So this Allie, you can, if you don't already have this in your list of resources, you can send this
I put
out.
the link in the chat.
Yep, perfect. It's it may need a little bit of updating because I think this is the original list of the first round of boxes, so these would all be the big boxes. And then I think there's another spot on their website that lists the smaller boxes as well, but that's great. All right, so are we ready?
Yeah.
All right. So on Spruce Mountain, and you guys are going to have to determine who's Spruce Mountain 1 and who's Spruce Mountain 2, unless you want a different team name.
We're good.
All right, so whoever wants to be Spruce Mountain 1, go ahead and pick your Jeopardy category.
Can we please do It's the Law for 100?
All right. So at which age do you need an adult fishing or hunting license?
16. Oh, what is 16 years old? I don't know.
What is 16? Good job.
So how do we buzz in on this? Are we just taking turns?
Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
taking turns. If you're in the
Oh, the competitive spirit.
sorry to disappoint you, Rob. I'll work on the technology.
Owen and I were raising our hand, but we're good.
Okay. All right, we'll just take turns. All right, so Spruce Mountain 2.
Skull ID, species ID, and which vor am I 200?
So there is your image of the skull.
How big is that?
Oh, yeah, good question, because we don't have a measurement on that one.
Pretty small. That looks like a fox from earlier. Is that my final answer? I should think about it more, but first, that's my first instinct. All right.
Is a fox? Is that what you said?
Not final answer. I'm still thinking about it.
No problem. Take it.
Dude, you got to come up with an answer.
I do. Fox. Why not? I'm wrong, right?
And if it is a fox, which type of vor?
Carnivore.
Oh.
So if we're looking at those teeth, which teeth indicate what they can eat?
The I'm thinking of the tooth. I just can't think of the name. The big long pointy one.
The big long pointy one. That is
canine.
Canine.
All
Yep.
right.
Good. So those canines, that's a good one because that's going to indicate he can or she can hunt for food. Those canines are used for grabbing and holding in that prey. What else do you see with the teeth? Do they look sharp or flat?
Rather pointy.
Rather pointy. So right behind that canine, those are your premolars, and they are pointy. And as you get back into the far teeth and into the molars, are still a little well, that carnasial tooth is your 1, 2, 3, 4th tooth. You see how it's a little bit longer and very, very sharp knife edge. Then you get into the molars. So having some of those molars with a flat surface indicates it can grind up whatever it's eating with those types of teeth. So I'll give you
I stopped paying attention for the wrong moment.
That's okay. So which vor?
Oh wait, so
Which vor?
That means it's an omnivore.
Yeah.
It's hard to see those ones. So
yeah, it is a little bit hard. And we will do I know Allie has been working really hard to get some good pictures of the skulls so that it'll be, easier to identify, but this happens to belong to our friend the raccoon, and he is an omnivore.
So I got it wrong.
So I can't give you, because it was a 2-part, can't give you the points for that one. But you did guess correctly that it was an omnivore based on the teeth. So I got to give you a pat on the back for that one. All right. All right, Spruce Mountain 1.
Can we do habitat for 200, please?
So we're looking for the term that describes the loss of connectivity of forested habitat, often due to human disturbance.
Just a second.
Sure.
What is forestry?
What is forest fragmentation? So when we look at our landscape, if you guys ever get on like Google Earth and you type in your address where you can kind of look down onto the landscape, you're going to see lots of patches of open space and disturbance where people have been building their houses, where there's roads and that sort of thing. And so forest fragmentation is actually one of the biggest threats to a lot of our species. In particular, in southern Maine, black bears really need a lot of forests to travel through to den up in and all that other stuff. And they utilize open space, they'll utilize wetlands, and they'll utilize farms and fields and early successional habitat, but their limiting factor really is how connected the forest habitat is. So understanding that effect of forest fragmentation on the landscape in relation to how it disturbs movement of animals and changes habitat is a really important concept. So like I said, some of these are lot of overlap with forestry and aquatics. All right, Spruce Mountain 2, you have a chance to go ahead.
Just pick, Owen.
Let's do habitats for 200. Oh, not habits. Sorry, 200.
Habits. Okay. So black bears and members of the weasel family have this special reproductive adaptation that delays pregnancy if the animal is injured, sick, or just not in good health. What is that called?
We do not know.
It's okay. So it's called delayed implantation. So if a bear in particular goes into the winter and it just has not had much luck with putting on weight and finding enough food, and the individual is stressed, that embryo will actually delay implantation and will not develop until that bear is in a better condition of health. And in some members of the weasel family, that delayed implementation can last for many months, even 8 or 9 months before that pregnancy will take place. And that's a huge adaptation trait, because if you have an animal going into winter or going through a lot of stress or injury or illness, the energy that it takes to gestate through that pregnancy and then raise that young can be a death sentence for a weakened animal. So by delaying that, being able to have that delayed implantation just gives them a better chance to survive those tough times of the year or tough situations. So it's definitely survival strategy, and it's not something they think about. It happens. All right, Spruce Mountain 1.
Can I please do habitat for 100?
Okay. So this is a term they're looking for. So a non-native species that significantly modifies or disrupts the ecosystems it colonizes.
Just a second, please.
Sure.
What is invasive?
What is an invasive species? Good job. We can have some native species that are invasive, but the ones we're always most concerned with are the ones that are not native to the area. They can really push out our native species, kind of create a monoculture, can often provide lesser value of food and forage, and really, in some cases, damage other trees, or in the case of Japanese knotweed, can actually damage homes and structures. So good answer. Okay, Spruce Mountain 2.
Melting pot for 500, says my teammate.
Melting pot?
Yes.
Going for the big one. Okay. So this anadromous keystone species is known to tie the ocean, rivers, and lakes together, and is an important bait fish for the lobster industry.
Oh, what was it again?
We're gonna go with alewives.
Alewives is your answer? You are correct. What are alewives? Good job. Just like that, you took the lead. Okay, Spruce Mountain 1.
Maine critters for 200.
What is the Maine state insect?
Just a minute.
You better not be Google searching over there, Brendan Vayu.
I'm thinking. What is the black fly? I have no idea. Oh.
Although that was a very good guess and is probably the most common answer that we get, it's actually the honeybee. All right, Spruce Mountain 2.
Skull ID for 500.
Skull ID for 500. Whew. And again, I apologize that this one does not have a measuring ruler in front of it, but I can tell you it's about probably 4 to 5 inches long.
Oh. Wow.
Closer to 4.
Porcupine? Is it a is that, I think it's porcupine. Porcupine, final answer?
Okay, and then which vor?
Herbivore.
Okay, so that's a good answer. This is actually a hare or jackrabbit, but very close. So those rodents are tough unless they're like right next to each other to start to identify. But you did a really good job recognizing that it's in that rodent family, and they are herbivores. So and then what do we have? Anybody, either team, do you guys know how many species of rabbits and hares we have in Maine?
I don't know.
Well, there's the snowshoe hare, and there's the New England Cottontail, and there's the Eastern Cottontail. and then I'm out of ammo. So I'm going to go with 3.
Off the top of my head, I thought 5. I wouldn't know for sure.
So we have actually 2. We have snowshoe hare, and the snowshoe hare changes color in winter. And we have New England Cottontail, and New England Cottontail does not change color in winter, so it's a little brown bunny. And as for the Eastern Cottontail, technically they're still in New Hampshire, but they're, I believe, found on an island in the Piscataqua River, so they're not far away. And the Eastern Cottontail actually, just again, it has a little bit easier time surviving. So where you get into New Hampshire and southern New England, they're much more common. But technically, they say we don't have them yet. All right, Spruce Mountain 1.
So I've lost my student, so I'm keeping the game alive here. Let's
Okay.
go with terminology for 100.
Define extirpation.
Extirpation is a species that has been reintroduced. I forgot that one.
That's okay. This is one of the ones that tricks up some of the teams. It's a species that no longer exists in a geographic area, so it might no longer exist in Maine, but it still exists elsewhere. So for the longest time, the mountain lion was considered extirpated. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declared the eastern cougar extinct a few years ago. But up to that point, they had been defined as extirpated. Wolves are considered extirpated. And there's some other species listed on Inland Fisheries website too.
Huh.
All right. So Spruce Mountain 2.
I think I want to do 200 this time. Let's do, yeah. I mean, we're already up 500. We don't want to lose that.
Spruce Mountain 1. I think that sounds like a challenge.
Track skins and scat ID for 200.
Track skins and scat ID.
Are blunt.
You go ahead with whatever you want.
Do porcupines have sharp claws or blunter claws?
Well, they got to climb a tree.
So that would probably mean sharper, right? Because
That's what you think.
A squirrel has.
You go
claws.
for it, Owen.
Groundhog. What?
That's your final answer?
Groundhog. Porcupine.
Oh, come on! I was right, and then
Good guess. So a lot of times with track ID, I think all of the track replicas that we use are hindfoot tracks. There are many species of animals that have a different track between the front and the rear tracks. It's good to identify both. For instance, when you're talking about rabbits, whether it's snowshoe hare or New England Cottontail, the front foot is much smaller and compact track. And then the back foot, you can see the longer, and a longer track, and in the snowshoe here, you have that sort of snowshoe shape. So understanding how many toes that they have on their, that show up on the track on their front feet and back feet are important, because some animals have 4 toes and some have 5 that show up. But boy, you were really right on with that porcupine. You had, your gut instinct was correct. So I think you did ask a good question there about claws, because when you can see the nails in a track pattern, then that also tells you a little bit more about that species. For some species, you don't see the nails in those tracks. So, all right, so I think it's back to Spruce Mountain 1.
Let's take It's the Law for 300, please.
Okay, these are the ways you can take a black bear legally in Maine during their designated seasons.
What is trapping, hunting with dogs? And I'm not sure how to word the other one. Regular hunting with firearms.
Mm-hmm. And there's one more.
Oh, baiting. Sorry, baiting.
There you go. Trapping, hunting with dogs, hunting over bait, and then the general hunting season, which is with the gun and archery. I'll give you the points for that one. Good job. Okay, Spruce Mountain 2.
What are we doing, Owen?
Alrighty. Let's do track, skins, and scat idea for 300. That's a weird looking foot. So it's a back foot. Most likely.
About 10 centimeters.
You know what? You don't know?
Go ahead.
I'm being told to say groundhog.
That one's a raccoon. So one of the telling features are the long toes. So even on their back feet, they have long toes. And as we know, in their front feet, they use those toes much like we use our hands and fingers to pick things up. All right, Spruce Mountain 1.
Let's take It's the Law for 400 to take the lead.
So you must do this if you catch a collared or earmarked animal.
Report it to the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
So you contact your biologist to let them know, and you want to return any collars or tags, and hopefully you can provide the location of capture. We'll give you the points on that one. Good. All right. Spruce Mountain 2.
It's the Law for 500.
So this is an activity that you must do every time you pull a boat out of a water body to prevent the spread of invasive aquatic species. And the hint is there's 3 words.
You clean, you drain, and you dry.
I should give you double points on that one. That's excellent. Clean, drain, and dry. All right. Back to Spruce Mountain 1.
Let's go Maine critters for 100.
What is the Maine state mammal?
What is the Maine state mammal? Is it the moose?
Correct. It is the moose. It's a tie game. The Spruce Mountain 2.
Let's go back.
Terminology for 500.
So this is a tricky one. So what is the term for conserving a species outside of its native habitat, or also considered off-site conservation? So you're taking a species that needs help, but in order to save it, you gotta get it outside of its native habitat. What is that term?
I don't think flying goats with helicopters.
No, that wasn't
applies
the
here.
answer. I was just trying to think of an example.
I'll give you another hint. It's Latin.
Oh, it's Latin.
Zoology. Don't know.
Is that the final answer?
Don't know.
Yes.
So you'll see this a lot in journals and research documents, but it's the XC2. So it's basically, again, you've got a species that's on the brink of collapse, and you got to do something pretty drastic with it. And so oftentimes you'll take it outside of its habitat. Sometimes this may be in a botanical garden. It could be in a zoo, sort of thing. All right, Spruce Mountain 1.
Terminology 400.
So this is the term for species whose status provides information on the overall condition of the ecosystem it's living in and all other species that are living in that same ecosystem.
What is an indicator species?
There you go. Good job. All right, Spruce Mountain 2.
Maine critters for 400.
Okay, so you got to list all 3. Looking for 3 species of reptiles that are on the Maine endangered species list.
The black racer snake, the box turtle.
Box turtle.
Box turtle and the
Blandings turtle.
Blandings turtle. I forgot those very quickly.
Great job. Got all your points. Good job. So Spruce Mountain 1.
Now let's go habitat for 400.
The New England Cottontail lives in this type of habitat.
I feel like we just talked about this. Grass.
So early successional or shrubland habitat.
That's right.
Yeah, they like that area about 5 years after it's been mowed or cleared, where it's nice and thick, almost the point you can't even walk through it or crawl through it. they're very dependent on structure of their habitat to protect them from predators. Okay, Spruce Mountain 2, you can take the lead.
Let's see. Maine Critters 300. Why not?
All right, so what is the Maine state fish?
Atlantic salmon.
Well, it could be landlocked. It's Salmo salar.
Is it
Final answer?
Yep.
It is our landlocked salmon.
So specifically the landlocked one? Or
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. Specifically the landlocked.
Let's go habits for 300.
So black bears do this to survive Maine winters.
What is hibernate?
They're actually not a true hibernator. They go into what's called seasonal dormancy or torpor. They're very alert and awake through the winter. They're just, I relate it to my teenagers on a Saturday morning when I want them to get up to do chores at 9 and they stumble around and run into things. And I think it's interesting because in the world of biologists, this has been debated for decades, but they're actually not, they don't hibernate per se.
Habitat 300?
Name one state-listed endangered species that uses essential habitat in Maine. An essential habitat is a designation. And I'll give you a little hint. It's a bird.
Is there only one?
There are technically 3.
Oh.
There are 4 species that have designated essential habitat, but one has been removed from the endangered species list. And there are 3 left on the endangered species list.
The least term?
You got it. So the 3 are piping plover, roseate tern, and your least tern.
Piping plover is still on the endangered list?
It is. And everybody's been starting to put their fences up already at the beaches to protect that nesting habitat.
Let's go habits for 400.
So what are the limiting factors that combine to define the ability of a species to thrive in a specific habitat? There are 4 of them.
4 limiting factors. I don't know.
Food, shelter, water, and space.
So bad at this.
So for each species, they have their own requirements for each of those 4 factors. And depending on what that balance is, will determine what their home range size is and how big of a habitat space that they need.
You want a 100 this time?
Sure,
Or-
pick one.
I can't see past the taskbar how ahead we are. Oh, we're ahead by 300. Let's do Skull ID for 100. Play it safe this time. That is white-tailed deer.
And which vor?
Herbivore.
You're correct.
We'll do
Now the bonus in here should be, is it a male or female?
Male.
And why?
Antlers.
Right. Now there are occasionally female deers that do sport some very short antlers, but in general, it's the males that have the antlers. And that's, used for during the breeding season for fighting with other males. They also have these scent glands at the base of the antlers that as they're, rubbing off that soft velvet material that has been growing on the outside of the antlers in the fall and exposing the harder surfaces, they've got these scent glands that leave behind, those chemical messages for other deer in the neighborhood.
It's the law for 200.
So the daily legal hunting hours for wild birds and mammals during their legal hunting seasons. So what is that sort of average daily hunting hours?
1/2 hour before sunrise until 1/2 hour after sunset.
Correct. There are some exceptions, but in general, that is 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after. Spruce Mountain 2, what's your?
Terminology 300.
All right, so this is a term for areas that currently or historically have provided physical or biological features that are essential to the conservation of an endangered or threatened species in Maine, and it may require special management considerations. Examples of areas that could qualify for designation are nest sites or important feeding areas.
Essential habitat?
Good job.
All right, I'll bite. Melting pot for 100.
So identify this fish.
Landlocked salmon.
Correct. All right, Spruce Mountain 2.
What you want, bud?
Melting pot for 400. Examples of cold water fish.
So these are examples of cold water fish species found in Maine. Can you name 2?
There's landlocked salmon. Trying to think of another one. Sunfish or wormholes, right? Okay, so not sunfish. I can think of the general type
Something
of fish,
like
but
a salmon.
I can't think of the specific name. But I can think of the general.
We often say salmon and They're salmonids. They're in the same family.
Thinking.
Brook.
Trout.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to go with salmon and brook trout.
Correct. So we have, those of you that like to fish, we've a pretty unique situation where we have eastern brook trout in many of our small brooks and streams, and quite a bit of abundance, and you don't find that much outside of New England. So we're a pretty special place we live.
Melting pot 300.
This is the term for the illegal take of wildlife.
Poaching.
What is poaching?
Terminology for 200.
So this is a term for when animals are most active at sorry, spelled that wrong, at dusk and dawn.
Crepuscular.
Good job. I'll fix that one.
Melting pot 200.
So name an extirpated species that once lived in Maine.
Caribou.
Correct.
Hey, we have a question.
Yes.
So on Easter Sunday, I was driving through Fayette, and I saw what I think were 4 Sandhill Cranes in a cornfield. And they were extirpated, I think, all the way from east of the Mississippi. Is that right? Are they back in Maine?
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting observation because a lot of people have been seeing more Sandhill Cranes. There are instances where they actually stop here on their way through for migration. But I believe that there are, and I'll have to double check, but I think that there have been a few breeding pairs or suspected that they've been breeding pairs that have stayed around. So they are becoming, or I shouldn't say more common because it's still, they're still not that common to see, but they're starting to come back into Maine. And this is what's important about where we live because there's a lot of species, particularly, in birds that are making their way to their breeding grounds, which in some cases, some of these neotropical birds are, they nest in northern Aroostook County and in southern Canada. And so when we're talking about, managing a species and trying to save a species, when we've got Sandhill Cranes or we've got, a Blackburnian warbler or one of these migratory species, we have to not only look at what we can do here in our state, but then we have to look at, where are they spending their time the rest of the year? And so if they're, down in Central South America or down on the Gulf Coast in the winter time, we have to make sure that the habitat is there to support them during those seasons. And then along those flyways, it's critically important to have habitat where birds can stop to rest on those long flights. And so it's very tricky when you get into managing, those migratory species because now you're getting outside of your state borders and sometimes out of your country borders. Yeah. So that's an awesome observation. I hope you got some pictures.
I do. I actually have a video on my website of them.
Yeah.
They were pretty cool. They were just 30 feet off the road.
That's
you can
awesome.
tell why they were extirpated at one point because they're not very smart.
Well, they're a big bird, so there's not a whole lot that comes after them, and that's why they usually like those big open spaces because they can see if something is coming. But that's pretty cool. That's great to see. So I want to do just one more question each.
That sounds good.
Yep, sounds good. Yep.
Whose turn is it? Do you remember?
I think I just got caribou.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So since we're on main crit is 500. Go big or go home. Main crit is 500, please.
all right. All right, so this one's, what are the 3 species of mammals that are listed as endangered in Maine? Lynx. I think I should clarify that they're Maine endangered on the state listing.
So there's the it was Eastern Cottontail, right?
No, New England.
New England Cottontail, rather.
Long-eared bat,
Long-eared bat.
and there's another bat.
There's another
I think
bat.
it's 2 bats.
Not numbers, right? I'm just thinking of bat names that pop.
So New England Cottontail, long-eared bat, and Batman.
Batman.
It's the other cave bat,
The other cave bat.
or a cave bat, yes. Little brown bat.
Little brown, which was very, very, very common 15, 20 years ago. You know, they've just been decimated with, you know, the fungus, and just, you know, they tend to, you know, live together in those smaller colonies in the winter. Sometimes they'll get into like seasonal camps and stuff like that, and spend their winters there. But the bats have really had a rough go of it. Those were good guesses.
I guess I better go big with tracks, skins, and scat for 500. Is it a bald eagle?
You are correct.
It's giant.
So yeah, one of the biggest things is really looking at their feet. So when we're identifying a lot of like hawks and stuff, it's what's kind of interesting is that most of those birds are kind of hatched with super big feet and legs. So that's one of the things we look at identification, is the feet and leg characteristics that can really kind of tell us what species they might be. So it's kind of funny to see, you know, years ago I worked in a veterinary clinic, and we had somebody bring in a hawk that had fallen out of the nest, and you know, it pretty much had adult-sized feet. It was a red-tailed hawk, but that was really the only way we could identify it, because it didn't have any of the adult plumage yet. So, good guess. Want to leave it as a tie, or?
We went first. I feel like
So yeah, Owen gets one more.
more.
Okay, for the win.
For 100 to the win, dude.
Yeah. Track, skins, and scat for 100. Oh, that's
Come on, Owen.
red fox, right? That looks red fox-ish. Very
Right.
Very.
Your answer.
I'm nodding.
Okay, I can't see you nodding, but you got it. Now you get all the bragging rights.
Well, we get all the bragging.
All right, so that's what I had for you guys. I can share the link to this, you know, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with using the Jeopardy Lab, but I think it's kind of a fun way to work through some of the decision-making skills and that you need, and get learning some new facts about wildlife, and you know, yeah, I think it's just much more interesting sometimes than just reading the manuals.
Yes.
Do you guys have any other questions? Any resources you think you might need? You know, anything we can do to help you get prepared?
I think we're good. We're going to the tomorrow is our remote only day in the school, and we're going to the Envirothon kids. We're taking a trip to the Maine Wildlife Park.
Oh, awesome.
So that should help quite a bit.
Yep. Yes, they have a lot of great information out there throughout the park on their signs and stuff, and it's just great to see what the animals look like in person. Awesome. Well, I mean, if these guys think of anything, any questions at all, please let us know. You know, we can certainly point you in the right direction, find some additional resources, whatever you need. We want to make sure that this is a successful Envirothon for you guys this year. You know, we're kind of, you know, in a new era here of doing this online, but I certainly appreciate any feedback that you all have.
I'm very appreciative of everything you guys are doing, and I like one of the difficulties is the majority of my kids are playing sports today. So, but we're going to meet on Sunday, and having the videos of this is going to be really helpful to give to them. I just threw the link to my Sandhill Crane video in the chat. If you can look at that and tell me if I actually saw Sandhill Cranes. They have a red cap to them.
Yep.
I just want to point out to folks,
yes, that's what
for the safari boxes is definitely worth the effort to find one that is available for your teams to use, or your students to use. It's a whole different world to actually have the item there that you can have in your hand and look at its real size rather than a diagram or a picture. So if you can find one, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, and like I said, if you think you might want to borrow one and you can't get one close to you, I think, Allie, you had gotten the one from Audubon, was that correct?
Yes, Gilson Farm in Falmouth.
Yeah.
The Inland Fish and Wildlife Office in Augusta has them, and that's usually where I get them from.
Their kit is currently out of commission because I called them this spring and they said they probably weren't going to loan it out for a while because they have too many pieces they need to replace.
Yeah, I know MACD has talked about the possibility of trying to revitalize some of these safari boxes so they are more available. And I'm not sure how that might go down, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. The best thing might be to try to find a person like Missy or Dottie up in Aroostook County, or like the Audubon, somebody who has one, either that they've put together themselves, or they have some collection of materials that are available, and that's very helpful.
Yeah, it would be nice if, you know, like I said, we've talked about trying to get, you know, more materials, more skins and skulls, and maybe a couple more of the bigger boxes, because over time, the particularly the real skulls take a beating. They lose their teeth and get damaged here and there by handling and wear and tear. So, and as teachers, you can also, if you don't already, you can get a permit that allows you to collect skins and skulls for educational purposes. And sometimes the schools have an umbrella permit for that. So, and that helps you in a couple ways. One, sometimes you can reach out to a local trapper and they will donate skulls. Or you can learn to process them yourself. And roadkill is a great source of educational skull animal parts for skulls, but you have to have a permit for those. So if you're feeling brave, I have to tell you, that was my work study job in college, was preparing skins and skulls from roadkill.
So you added that to your resume. You collected roadkill, huh? Nice.
And in the world of biologists, that's a pretty standard. That's not a very impressive thing on the resume. That's pretty standard. But having, I think the Trappers Association, Maine Trappers Association, has members all over, and they've also given me a few really discounted skins, and a couple, I've gotten a couple skulls from them already cleaned, which is definitely worth it because it does take a little bit of time to get them cleaned up.
Okay.
So that's all I have. I hope it's helpful. And again, please let us know if you think of anything after the fact, or if you need any other advice or have any other questions.